Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into the world of feudal Japan, but perhaps not the way you're used to seeing it. We're not just admiring the gleaming swords or the stoic poses. No, we're going to imagine what it was really like to be a samurai. So, picture this. You're not scrolling through social media in your comfy bed. Instead, the first hint of gray light is seeping through the paper screens of a decidedly uninsulated room. The air is cold enough to see your breath, and the floorboards beneath your thin sleeping mat feel like slabs of ice. There's no snooze button here. Your day started hours ago, probably with a dousing of cold water, because comfort breeds weakness, or so you're constantly told. Forget your morning coffee. You're more likely to be sipping some lukewarm, slightly bitter tea if you're lucky, before the real work begins. And by work, I mean a lifetime of grueling training, unwavering loyalty, and a dress code that makes modern business attire look like pajamas. You'll be expected to master the art of war, the art of poetry, the art of a perfectly executed bow, and the art of looking incredibly stern, even when all you want is a decent nap. And here's a little reality check. You probably won't survive this. Statistically speaking, a violent death, either on the battlefield or through a rather unpleasant ritual, is a pretty high probability. It's a tough gig, no doubt about it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. So drop that in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see our little community spread across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey doesn't begin when you choose it. It begins pretty much the moment you can walk, maybe even before. You are born into this life, this esteemed yet incredibly demanding warrior class. There's no career quiz in feudal Japan suggesting samurai as a top pick based on your aptitude for discipline and a high pain tolerance. No, your father is a samurai. His father was a samurai, and his father before him, stretching back through generations, who carved out their family's honor with sharpened steel and spilled blood. So, little you, barely out of infancy, finds yourself not with soft toys, but with a miniature wooden sword, a bakken, placed in your tiny hands. It feels awkward, heavy for your undeveloped arms. Your first lessons aren't about sharing or being nice. They're about stance, about grip, about how to look fierce even when you're still figuring out how to tie the laces on your own little straw sandals. The Waraji. Imagine your nursery rhymes are tales of legendary warriors, their heroic deeds, their unflinching loyalty, and yes, their noble deaths. Bedtime stories aren't about fluffy bunnies. They're about the 47 Ronin, about Minamoto no Yoshitsune, about sacrifice and duty. You learn very quickly that emotions, especially fear or overt displays of affection, are to be suppressed. A samurai boy, even a very small one, does not cry. Not when he tumbles and scrapes his knee during those endless practice drills in the dusty courtyard. Not when his older brother, already a stern taskmaster in his own right, lands a particularly stinging blow with a practice sword. You learn to bite back the tears, to clench your jaw, and to get back up. This early conditioning is designed to forge you into tempered steel. Historians tell us that this rigorous upbringing was standard fare, particularly for sons of samurai. From as young as 5 or 7, formal training in martial arts would commence. you'd be bundled off to a dojo, perhaps within your own family's estate, if you're of high rank, or to a local master. Here, the world shrinks to the rhythmic clang of wooden swords, the thwack of arrows hitting straw targets, and the stern, unwavering gaze of your sensei. You're not just learning to fight, you're learning to endure. Some accounts, perhaps embellished over time, perhaps frighteningly true, speak of even more extreme methods to build resilience. You might hear whispers, or perhaps even experience, being sent to a graveyard at night, alone, to overcome your fear of the dark and the spirits. Or being made to go without food for extended periods, or to stand barefoot in the snow, all to toughen your spirit, to make you unyielding. It's a point of contention among experts just how widespread these more brutal, hardening practices were across all strata of the samurai class. Were these experiences reserved for the sons of the most powerful daimyo? Or was it a more common trial, a shared crucible forging the warrior spirit across the board? The consensus leans towards the elite experiencing the more extreme ends, but a general expectation of stoicism and physical toughness was universal. Your education isn't solely martial, though that is undoubtedly the core. You're also expected to learn to read and write, to compose poetry, to understand the complex rules of etiquette and ceremony. A samurai is meant to be a cultured warrior, a paradoxical blend of brutal efficiency and refined sensibility. So, in between sessions where your muscles scream and your knuckles are raw, you might find yourself hunched over a low desk, painstakingly practicing calligraphy, the brush strokes as demanding in their precision as any sword kata. You might be introduced to the tea ceremony shanoyu, where every gesture is laden with meaning, a meditative practice designed to cultivate calm and focus, qualities essential for a warrior who must remain composed in the face of death. But even these cultural pursuits are often tinged with the ethos of your warrior path. The poems you study often speak of transient beauty, of loyalty, of the inevitability of death, themes that resonate deeply with the samurai way of life. The characters you practice writing might be the names of famous battles, or virtues like courage and honor. There's no real escape from the path laid out for you. Every lesson, every experience is tailored to mold you into the ideal samurai. Forget childhood dreams of being a fisherman or a scholar in a quiet monastery. Your destiny is tied to the sword, to your lord, to the honor of your house. And this intense indoctrination, starting from your very first memories, ensures that by the time you are a young man, the samurai path is not just a profession. It is the very fiber of your being. You don't just do samurai, you are samurai. And the weight of that, the constant unspoken pressure to live up to centuries of tradition and expectation, settles upon your young shoulders long before you're strong enough to comfortably bear the weight of real armor. The sunrise that greeted you this morning wasn't just the start of a new day. It was another day deeper into a life that demands everything and promises glory, but often delivers something far more complicated, and, frankly, quite a bit suckier than the legends let on. So you've survived, or rather endured, your rather intense samurai kindergarten and early school years. The wooden sword has been replaced by a real one, or at least the promise of one very soon, and the weight of expectation has only grown heavier. Now, you're old enough to truly begin to understand the invisible framework that governs your every thought, your every action. Bushido, the way of the warrior. It's not just a set of rules. It's a moral compass, a spiritual guide, and an incredibly restrictive social contract, all rolled into one. And let me tell you, it's not designed for comfort or personal expression. It's designed for unwavering loyalty, absolute self-discipline, and a willingness to embrace death as readily as you'd accept a cup of tea. Easy peasy, right? You learn about the core virtues, often cited as 7. Gi, justice or rectitude. Yu, courage. Jin, benevolence or mercy. Rei, respect or politeness. Makoto, honesty or sincerity. Meiyo, honor. And Chugi, loyalty. Sounds noble, doesn't it? Almost like something you'd see on an inspirational poster. But living them, day in and day out, under the constant scrutiny of your peers, your superiors, and your own hypercritical inner voice, is a different story. Take Gi, for instance. It's not just about being fair. It's about knowing the right way, the just path, and adhering to it without deviation, even if it's personally disadvantageous, even if it's dangerous. And who decides what's just? Often, it's your lord, your daimyo. Your sense of justice must align perfectly with his interests. Then there's you, courage. Not just battlefield bravery, but the courage to face any adversity, any pain, any loss, without flinching. This is where that early training in suppressing emotions really kicks in. You might be terrified, heartbroken, or seething with frustration, but on the outside, you are the epitome of calm, stoic resolve. This leads directly to the Japanese concepts of tatame and han, the public facade versus your true feelings. As a samurai, your tatame must be impeccable. Your han? Well, that's for you to wrestle with in the dead of night, alone, because showing it would be a sign of weakness, a crack in the armor of your samurai persona. Imagine having a terrible day. Your best friend just got transferred to a remote, mosquito-infested border province. Your favorite sword has a new nick in it, and you suspect your rice rations are being skimmed. But when your superior asks how you are, the only acceptable answer is a perfectly modulated, respectful affirmation that all is well. It's like living in a perpetual state of, I'm fine, even when your world is crumbling. Jin, benevolence or mercy, might seem like a soft touch in a warrior's code. It's about using your strength and position to protect the weak, to show compassion where appropriate. However, this benevolence is often balanced against, and sometimes overridden by, other virtues like loyalty or justice, as defined by your lord. Deciding when to be merciful and when to be ruthlessly efficient is a constant tightrope walk. Show too much mercy, and you might be seen as soft, indecisive. Show too little, and you might be branded cruel, lacking the true spirit of a samurai. Historians still ponder the practical application of Jin, especially in the brutal context of war and civil unrest. Was it a genuine aspiration, or more of an idealized concept that was often conveniently set aside when the situation demanded ruthlessness? Rei, respect, is woven into the very fabric of Japanese society. But for a samurai, it's amplified to an almost theatrical degree. The way you bow, the way you speak, the way you enter a room, the way you handle your swords. Every single action is governed by intricate rules of etiquette, determined by your rank, the rank of the person you're interacting with, and the specific situation. A misstep in etiquette isn't just embarrassing. It can be a grave insult, a dishonor. You might spend years mastering the subtle nuances of body language and speech, knowing that a misplaced word or an insufficiently deep bow could have serious repercussions. It's like an endless, high-stakes performance where forgetting your lines could be fatal. One particularly quirky tidbit is the etiquette surrounding swords. You wouldn't just casually lean your katana against a wall. There were specific ways to carry it, to place it when sitting, even to pass it to someone else. All deeply symbolic of the respect due to the soul of the samurai. For instance, when visiting someone, placing your katana on your right side, making it harder to draw, was a sign of trust. Placing it on your left indicated readiness or suspicion. Makoto, honesty or sincerity, means your words and actions must be true. No deceit, no duplicity. This sounds straightforward, but in a world of complex social hierarchies and political maneuvering, it can be a minefield. How do you remain perfectly honest when your lord asks for your opinion on a plan you believe to be disastrous, but criticizing it openly would be a grave act of disloyalty? Again, the tension between Han and Tadame rears its head. Perhaps sincerity in this context often meant being sincerely committed to your role and your duties, even if it required a degree of internal compromise. And then we come to Meiyo honor. This is the bedrock, the absolute foundation of your existence. Your personal honor, the honor of your family, the honor of your lord. These are paramount, more valuable than life itself. Every action you take is weighed against its impact on your honor. A stain on your honor is a stain that can only be cleansed in the most dramatic and often final ways. The fear of shame, of Haji, is a powerful motivator, arguably more powerful than the fear of death. You'd rather face a dozen enemies on the battlefield than face the contempt of your peers for a dishonorable act. This intense focus on honor meant that samurai were incredibly sensitive to perceived slights. An errant word, a look construed as disrespectful, could escalate quickly into a deadly confrontation. Finally, chugi, loyalty. Absolute, unquestioning loyalty to your daimyo. Your life is not your own. It belongs to your lord. If he commands you to ride into a hopeless battle, you ride. If he commands you to give up your lands, your titles, even your family, you obey. There is no room for debate. No, let me think about it. This unswerving devotion is celebrated in countless tales and legends. Perhaps one of the most famous texts that explores the samurai mindset, though written later in the relatively peaceful Edo period by the legendary Ronin Miyamoto Musashi, is Go Rin no Sho, or the Book of Five Rings. While primarily a treatise on swordsmanship and strategy, its underlying principles reflect the discipline, self-reliance, and singular focus that were hallmarks of the idealized samurai spirit, echoing the demands of Bushido. The debate among scholars often revolves around whether Bushido, as this clearly defined set of virtues, truly existed as a universal written code throughout the entire feudal period, or if it was more of an unwritten, evolving warrior ethos that was later codified and romanticized, particularly during the long peace of the Tokugawa shogunate, when samurai had more time for philosophy than fighting. Regardless of its precise historical codification, the core tenets of honor, loyalty, and self-sacrifice profoundly shaped your life, creating a rigid framework that left precious little space for personal desires, for comfort, or for the kind of individual freedom you might take for granted today. Every choice, every breath was measured against this demanding code. All right, so you're steeped in Bushido, your moral compass locked firmly on unwavering and slightly terrifying. Now, how do you actually become the fearsome, respected warrior everyone expects you to be? The answer is simple and utterly exhausting. Practice. Endless, grueling, mind-numbingly repetitive practice. Forget hitting the gym a few times a week when you feel like it. Your dojo is your second home, and your training schedule is relentless, designed to push you to your absolute limits and then a little bit further, just for good measure. You're not just learning techniques, you're forging muscle memory so deep that you could and would be expected to fight effectively even when half asleep, terrified, or grievously wounded. Your day likely begins before dawn, not with a gentle stretching routine, but with suburi, thousands upon thousands of sword swings. You're out in the training yard, perhaps with dozens of other young samurai, the air filled with the whoosh of wooden bakken or the heavier suburido cutting through the chill morning air. Your sensei, a grizzled veteran whose scars tell more stories than any scroll, watches with an eagle eye. Every stance, every grip, every angle of the cut must be perfect. Your shoulders burn, your wrists ache, blisters form on your palms, burst, and then form calluses that feel like old leather. There's no complaining, no asking for a break. You just keep swinging, aiming for that impossible perfection, the cut that is both devastatingly powerful and ethereally graceful. This isn't just about physical conditioning. It's about spiritual forging, Tanrin. The idea that through relentless repetition, you temper your spirit just as a swordsmith tempers steel. But swordsmanship kenjutsu is just one pillar of your martial education. You're also expected to master the bow kyujutsu. This isn't the archery you might see at a summer camp. The Japanese yumi is a uniquely asymmetrical longbow, powerful and difficult to master. You spend hours practicing on horseback, yabusame, trying to hit small targets while galloping at full speed. A skill that looks incredibly cool in movies, but is ridiculously difficult to achieve in reality. Imagine trying to thread a needle while riding a roller coaster, and you're getting close. Your thighs ache from gripping the horse, your draw arm trembles with fatigue, and the frustration of missed shots can be immense. Yet, you persist, because a samurai who cannot shoot accurately from the saddle is only half a warrior. Then there's the spear, sojutsu. The yari is a versatile weapon, crucial for dismounting cavalry or keeping multiple opponents at bay. You practice thrusts, sweeps, and parries, learning to use the spear's length to your advantage. It's less about brute strength and more about leverage and timing, but it still requires immense core strength and stamina. Drills involve facing off against training partners, the clash of wooden spears echoing in the dojo, each thud a reminder of a potential opening, a mistake that in real combat would mean injury or death. And of course, horsemanship, bajutsu, is fundamental. Your horse isn't just transportation, it's your partner in battle. You learn to ride almost as if you were born in the saddle, to control your mount with subtle shifts in weight and pressure from your knees, leaving your hands free for weapons. You practice intricate maneuvers, charges, and quick turns, developing a bond with your steed, born of countless hours of shared effort. One quirky and frankly rather hardcore training method involved samurai practicing their archery or swordsmanship in freezing cold water, sometimes for hours. The idea was to build not just physical resilience to extreme conditions, but also mental fortitude. If you can maintain focus and execute techniques flawlessly while your body is screaming in protest against the cold, you're less likely to falter in the heat of battle. Some schools, or RIU of martial arts, became incredibly famous, each with its own secret techniques and philosophical underpinnings. The Katori Shinto-ryu, for example, is one of the oldest extant martial arts, founded in the 15th century, and its curriculum was comprehensive, covering not just swordsmanship, but also spearmanship, naginata, staff fighting, and even ninjutsu-like espionage techniques. These different ryu often had fierce rivalries, each claiming the superiority of their methods. The physical toll of this constant training is immense. You live in a state of perpetual muscle soreness. Bruises are your constant companions. Minor injuries, sprains, strains, cuts are just part of the daily grind. There's no concept of modern sports science, no physiotherapy, no carefully planned rest and recovery cycles. If you're injured, you're expected to train through it, unless it's something truly debilitating. Pain is weakness leaving the body might as well be the unofficial motto of your dojo. It's a brutal logic, but it's the logic of a warrior society that needs its defenders to be unbreakable. Beyond the physical, there's the mental exhaustion. The sheer monotony of practicing the same kata, the same drills, thousands upon thousands of times, can be soul-crushing. The pressure to constantly improve, to meet the impossibly high standards set by your instructors and by the legends of the samurai who came before you, is immense. Doubt can creep in. Am I good enough? Will I be able to perform when it truly matters? But just like physical pain, these doubts must be suppressed, pushed aside, and replaced with unwavering focus and determination. Historians often debate the actual battlefield effectiveness of some of the more highly ritualized or aesthetically focused training forms versus the more practical, down and dirty combat drills. While a perfectly executed kata is a thing of beauty and demonstrates incredible discipline, how well did it translate to the chaotic, unpredictable scrum of a real fight, where there are no choreographed moves and your opponent isn't politely waiting for you to complete your form? It's likely that the most effective samurai were those who could blend the discipline of formal training with the adaptability and raw aggression needed to survive actual combat. And it's not like you can just decide one day, you know what? I think I've had enough spear practice for one lifetime. I'm going to take up flower arranging full time. This is your life, your duty, the aches, the pains, the endless repetition. They are the price of being a samurai. There's a certain grim satisfaction in pushing your body to its limits, in feeling yourself grow stronger, faster, more skilled. But there are undoubtedly moments, perhaps late at night, as you try to soothe your aching muscles in a hot bath, if you're fortunate enough to have access to one, when you might wonder if there isn't an easier way to live. But that thought is fleeting, quickly dismissed. Because you are samurai, and this is the path you walk, every aching step of the way. So you've spent years honing your body and mind into a finely tuned weapon, enduring endless drills until your muscles sing with areas of agony. Now it's time to get dressed for success, samurai style. And when I say dressed, I mean encasing yourself in a complex, heavy, and often surprisingly uncomfortable suit of armor, or yoroi. Forget those sleek, agile ninjas you see in movies, flitting about in dark pajamas. Your battle attire is a far more cumbersome affair, a testament to status, tradition, and the grim necessity of protecting yourself from pointy things. Putting on your armor is not a quick slip it on and go kind of deal. It's a ritual, a process, often requiring the assistance of at least one retainer, especially for the more elaborate suits worn by higher-ranking samurai. Imagine trying to assemble a particularly complicated piece of IKEA furniture, but it's made of lacquered metal plates, silk cords, and leather, and you have to wear it. First come the undergarments, the shitage and padded leggings, haydate, to prevent chafing, a small mercy, but a mercy nonetheless. Then the main components, the cuirass or diu, protecting your torso, often made of individual scales or plates, painstakingly laced together with colorful silk braids, odoshi ito. These laces weren't just decorative. Their color and pattern could signify your clan or rank. You've got shoulder guards, sewed, armored sleeves, koti, thigh guards, haydate again, but the armored kind, and greaves, sun-eat, to protect your shins. Each piece is tied on, adjusted, and secured. It's a slow, methodical process. And then there's the helmet, the kabuto. This isn't just a simple metal pot. It's often an ornate piece of craftsmanship, featuring elaborate crests, maydate, perhaps stylized animal figures, horns, or sunbursts, designed to identify you, proclaim your lineage, and, let's be honest, look incredibly intimidating. Attached to the kabuto is a neck guard, the shikoro, a series of curved plates that protect your neck and shoulders from downward cuts. Finally, many samurai wore a face mask, the mempo or mengu. These could range from a simple half mask covering the nose and chin to full masks with ferocious demonic expressions, often complete with bristly horsehair mustaches or terrifying scowls. One quirky aspect of these masks was that some were said to be designed with such exaggerated features to not only scare the enemy, but also to help channel the warrior's own aggressive spirit. It's like method acting, but with more potential for grievous bodily harm. Once you're fully kitted out, you feel heavy. A full suit of armor could weigh anywhere from 20 to over 60 pounds, depending on the style and materials. Now, try to imagine moving gracefully, fighting effectively, or even just standing around for hours in that much extra weight. In the summer, it's like being trapped in your own personal mobile oven. The layers of padding, lacquer, and metal trap heat and sweat pours off you in rivers. You can feel it trickling down your back, stinging your eyes. In winter, the metal becomes bitingly cold, seeping into your bones, making your joints stiff and your fingers numb. It's a constant battle against the elements, fought from within your own clanking, creaking shell. Movement is restricted. Your peripheral vision is limited by the helmet and face mask. Turning your head quickly is an effort. Raising your arms fully can be a challenge depending on the design of your shoulder guards. You learn to move in a way that accommodates the armor, to make its limitations work for you, or at least not actively work against you. The distinctive silhouette of a samurai in full oyuroi, the older, boxier style of armor primarily used by mounted archers, is iconic. This armor was designed to offer great protection, particularly when on horseback, but it was less suited for dismounted combat. Later styles, like the domaru or haramaki, which wrapped around the body and were lighter, became more popular as warfare shifted towards larger infantry engagements. Historians note this evolution in armor design as a direct response to changing battlefield tactics and weaponry. Despite its imposing appearance, your armor isn't invulnerable. There are gaps at the armpits, the inner thighs, the neck, places where a well-aimed spear thrust or arrow could find its mark. You're acutely aware of these vulnerabilities. Moreover, The silk cords holding the plates together, while strong, could be cut. Maintaining your armor is another chore. After a battle, or even just a strenuous training session, the lacquered plates need to be cleaned and polished, any damage repaired, and the silk cords checked for wear and tear. Rust is a constant enemy. Letting your armor fall into disrepair isn't just sloppy. It's a sign of disrespect for your tools and a potential death sentence. Scholars still debate the precise balance between the psychological impact of samurai armor and its practical utility. How much of the elaborate ornamentation was for show, for striking fear into the hearts of enemies and impressing allies with your wealth and status, versus its actual protective qualities? Undoubtedly, a line of heavily armored samurai, their colorful banners and terrifying helmet crests glinting in the sun, presented a formidable and demoralizing sight to their foes. Yet, in the thick of a chaotic melee, agility and awareness could be just as, if not more, important than an extra layer of lacquered steel. You might look magnificent, a walking piece of art, a symbol of warrior prowess, but you're also hot, restricted, and carrying the equivalent of a small child on your back. It's a far cry from the nimble, almost superhuman warriors often depicted in popular culture. The reality is a lot more clanky and sweaty. Definitely very sweaty. You'd probably long for the days of just your simple training GI, but duty calls, and duty apparently requires a very elaborate, very heavy, and very specific dress code. So you've endured the brutal training since childhood, internalized the demanding code of Bushido, and you're now sweating buckets inside your clanking, ornate, and surprisingly vulnerable suit of armor. What's next? Ah, yes, the main event, the battlefield. This is where all that training, all that mental conditioning, all that uncomfortable attire is supposed to pay off. But let me tell you, the reality of a feudal Japanese battlefield is likely a far cry from the glorious, heroic charges you might have imagined or seen depicted in epic tales. It's less about elegant duels under falling cherry blossoms and more about mud, blood, confusion, and a distinct lack of basic sanitation. The first thing that hits you is the noise. Not the disciplined shouts of the dojo, but a chaotic symphony of terror and aggression. The thunder of war drums, the blare of conch shell trumpets, the guttural war cries of thousands of men, the screams of the wounded and dying, the clash of steel on steel, the thud of arrows finding their mark. It's an overwhelming sensory assault that threatens to shatter your carefully cultivated samurai composure. Your heart hammers against your ribs, a frantic drummer out of sync with the rest of the deadly orchestra. You grip your weapon, knuckles white, trying to pick out orders from the din, trying to identify friend from foe in the swirling, dusty chaos. Then there's the sheer mess of it all. If it's rained recently, the ground is a treacherous quagmire sucking at your feet, making every step an effort. You might slip, fall, and find yourself struggling to get up in your heavy armor, an easy target. Even on dry ground, it's uneven, littered with rocks, discarded equipment, and soon enough, fallen bodies. There are no neat front lines, no orderly advances and retreats like in a game of chess. It's a swirling, desperate scrum, particularly in close quarters engagements. You might find yourself suddenly beset by multiple opponents, your carefully practiced katas dissolving into frantic instinctual movements aimed purely at survival. The romantic notion of noble samurai seeking out worthy opponents for one-on-one duels? While such encounters did happen, particularly between champions or high-ranking warriors. Much of the fighting, especially in larger battles, involved massed ranks of ashigaru, spear-wielding peasant foot soldiers, with samurai acting as shock troops, commanders, or leading charges into the fray. Historians often debate the true prevalence and nature of these single combat challenges versus the more brutal reality of a large-scale unit clashes. Was it a common occurrence? A display of individual prowess and honor? Or more of a romanticized ideal, with the gritty work often falling to the less glamorous, but numerically superior, ashigaru? The truth probably lies somewhere in between, depending on the specific period and the nature of the conflict. And if you do get wounded, well, let's just say battlefield medicine in feudal Japan wasn't exactly cutting edge. There are no medics rushing to your side with sterile bandages and morphine. If you're lucky, a comrade might try to staunch the bleeding with a strip of cloth. More serious wounds often meant a slow, agonizing death from infection or blood loss. Surgeons, if available, might attempt to extract arrows or sew up gashes, but without antibiotics or a proper understanding of germ theory, their efforts were often a grim lottery. You might have seen treatments involving things like applying heated stones to wounds or using herbal concoctions whose efficacy was questionable at best. Amputation was a brutal, often fatal, last resort. The fear of a disabling injury, one that would leave you unable to fight, and thus a burden to your lord and family, was perhaps almost as great as the fear of death itself. One particularly grim, yet integral part of samurai warfare was the practice of head-taking, or kubigiri. After a battle, samurai would often collect the heads of the enemies they had slain as proof of their kills. These heads would then be presented to their lord for inspection and reward. There was even an elaborate ritual for presenting and viewing these trophies, often involving tagging the head with the name of the deceased, if known, and the name of the samurai who took it. This practice, while gruesome to modern sensibilities, was a deeply ingrained part of the samurai honor and reward system. It led to a rather quirky, if macabre, habit. Some samurai would actually perfume their helmets or hair before going into battle. The idea was that if they were to be killed and their head taken, it would at least smell pleasant for their vanquisher. A final stoic display of refinement, even in death. Imagine your last conscious thought being, well, at least my head smells nice. It's a uniquely samurai kind of concern. Beyond the physical dangers, there's the psychological toll. The sheer horror of witnessing the brutality firsthand, of seeing men you've trained with, men you consider brothers in arms, cut down around you. The act of killing, even in the name of duty and honor, leaves its mark. You might find yourself haunted by the faces of those you've struck down, the sounds of their last moments. Bushido demands that you suppress these feelings, that you remain stoic and focused on your duty. But the human mind can only endure so much. The glory of battle, so often lauded in songs and stories, quickly tarnishes when you're wading through the viscera of what used to be your comrades and enemies. You might win the battle, earn acclaim, even gather a few impressive and smelly trophies. But the cost is etched into your memory, a silent counterpoint to the cheers of victory. You quickly learn that glory is often paid for in guts, and it's a currency that leaves everyone involved poorer in spirit, even if richer in reputation. So you've survived the battlefield, at least for now. You've managed not to become a decorative head in someone else's collection, and your armor is probably caked with a delightful mixture of mud, blood, and who knows what else. You're exhausted, emotionally drained, and physically battered. What you wouldn't give for a hot shower and a decent meal, right? Well, one of those might be a distant dream, and the other, well, let's talk about your culinary prospects as a samurai. Prepare for a gastronomic journey that's less Michelin star and more, is this all there is? Because often, your daily meals are going to be disappointingly bland, repetitive, and sometimes just barely enough to keep you going. The absolute staple of your diet, the cornerstone of your caloric intake, is rice. Lots and lots of rice. Usually it's steamed white rice, though depending on your status and the current supply situation, you might sometimes get brown rice, or rice mixed with other grains like barley or millet to stretch it out. For many samurai, especially those of lower rank or on campaign, meals might consist of little more than a bowl of rice, perhaps accompanied by some pickled vegetables, tsukemono, and a thin miso soup. Sound exciting? No, not really. It's fuel, pure and simple, designed to provide energy for your demanding lifestyle, not necessarily to tantalize your taste buds. Think about it. You're expending incredible amounts of energy in training, in battle, even just hauling that heavy armor around. You need calories. But the variety and richness of diet you might be accustomed to today just wasn't available or affordable for most. Meat was a rarity. While samurai weren't strictly vegetarian by religious decree, in the same way some Buddhist monks were, meat consumption was generally low across Japan for long periods. Fish, being an island nation, was more common, especially if you were stationed near the coast or a river. You might get some grilled or salted fish, perhaps a small piece to go with your mountain of rice, but don't expect lavish seafood banquets on the regular. What about fruits and vegetables? Yes, they were part of the diet, but the variety would be seasonal and regional. You'd likely see a lot of daikon radish, various leafy greens, cucumbers, eggplants, and gourds. These would often be pickled, as mentioned, which was a good way to preserve them, or perhaps simmered in a light broth. Spices, as you might know them from Indian or Southeast Asian cuisine, were not a major feature. Flavorings were more subtle. Soy sauce, shoyu, miso, fermented soybean paste, vinegar, and perhaps some ginger or wasabi if you were lucky. So, while nutritious enough to survive on, the flavor profile could get pretty monotonous. Imagine eating essentially the same few things, prepared in very similar ways, day in and day out. It's a far cry from scrolling through a food delivery app with endless choices. On campaign, things could get even grimmer. While armies would have supply lines, these could be disrupted. Foraging might become necessary. Soldiers, including samurai, would carry rations, often consisting of dried rice that could be rehydrated, or balls of cooked rice mixed with salt or pickled plums, umeboshi, which were valued for their preservative qualities and their ability to aid digestion and supposedly combat fatigue. You might also have hoshigaki, dried persimmons, or other dried provisions. One rather ingenious, if not exactly gourmet, campaign food was imogara nawa, which was essentially rope made from dried taro stems. When boiled, it would soften and could be eaten as a vegetable. Desperate times, desperate dietary measures, I suppose. It's a far cry from a protein bar. The quantity of food, particularly the rice, was directly linked to your status and wealth. A samurai's stipend was measured in koku, a unit of volume representing enough rice to feed one person for 1 year, approximately 180 liters, or 5 bushels. So, your entire economic standing was literally counted in rice. A higher-ranking samurai with a large stipend could afford a more varied diet, perhaps even employing skilled cooks. But for a lower-ranking samurai, or a ronin, a masterless samurai, who had fallen on hard times, simply getting enough rice to feed himself and his family could be a daily struggle. There are historical accounts of samurai having to pawn their armor, or even their precious swords, just to buy food. Historians point out that the samurai diet, while often simple, was generally healthy by the standards of the time, especially compared to some European diets which could be heavy and less balanced. The emphasis on rice, vegetables, and fish provided essential carbohydrates, vitamins, and protein. However, healthy doesn't always mean enjoyable or plentiful. The lack of dietary variety could lead to deficiencies in certain micronutrients, though things like miso, rich in protein and vitamins, and seaweed, rich in minerals, helped. Scholars sometimes debate the overall nutritional adequacy of the average samurai diet, particularly during long periods of warfare or famine. Could persistent, low-level malnutrition have affected performance or resilience? It's plausible, especially for those on the lower rungs of the samurai ladder. One quirky food-related tidbit from this era is the development of certain warrior foods that were believed to enhance strength or endurance. For instance, natto, fermented soybeans, with its strong smell and sticky texture, was considered highly nutritious and energy-giving, though it's definitely an acquired taste. Another was mochi, pounded glutinous rice cakes, which are very dense and calorie-rich, providing sustained energy. You might imagine a samurai choking down some natto before a battle, hoping it gives him an edge, a far cry from a pre-workout shake. So, when you picture your samurai ancestor, don't just imagine him looking stoic and cool with his swords. Picture him sitting down, perhaps with a sigh, to yet another meal of rice, pickles, and maybe a small piece of salted fish. Picture him carefully rationing his food on a long march, his stomach rumbling, knowing that his performance, his very survival, depends on these simple, often uninspiring, mouthfuls. It adds a layer of mundane reality to the otherwise romanticized image, doesn't it? Your culinary adventure as a samurai is less about exploring exciting new flavors and more about the relentless, unglamorous quest for sustenance. Bon appétit, or rather, itadakimasu, and hope tomorrow brings something other than plain rice. Alright, so, your diet is a bit on the bland side, but at least you're fueled up for more. Well, for more of everything that makes being a samurai less than ideal. After a hard day of training, or even worse, a gruesome battle, you're probably not smelling like a field of cherry blossoms. And that brings us to another less than glamorous aspect of your life: personal hygiene and medical care. In an era before germ theory, antibiotics, or even regular soap for many, staying clean and healthy was a significant challenge, especially when you're constantly sweating, bleeding, or marching through less than sanitary environments. Let's start with bathing. Regular bathing was indeed a part of Japanese culture, more so than in many parts of contemporary Europe. Public bathhouses, sento, were common in towns and cities, and larger samurai estates would have their own private baths. The Japanese bath, or furo, involved washing and scrubbing yourself thoroughly before entering the hot water, which was for soaking and relaxing. This sounds pretty good, right? A nice hot soak after a day of getting bruised and battered. However, access wasn't always guaranteed. If you were a lower-ranking samurai or on campaign, a proper bath might be an infrequent luxury. You might have to make do with a quick splash of cold water from a bucket or a dip in a river, if one was conveniently located and not, filled with something unpleasant downstream from an army camp. Soap, as we know it, wasn't widely available. People used things like powdered rice bran, nuka, in cloth bags to scrub their skin, or certain types of clay or ash, which had cleansing properties. While effective to a degree, it's not quite the same as a fragrant bar of your favorite artisanal soap. Hair care was also a consideration, especially with those elaborate samurai hairstyles, like the iconic top knot homage. Keeping your scalp clean and your hair properly oiled and styled was part of maintaining your appearance and, by extension, your dignity. But again, on campaign, hairstyles probably became a lot more functional. Now imagine you're on a military campaign. Thousands of men and horses are camped together for weeks or months. Sanitation facilities? Let's just say they were rudimentary at best. Latrines would be dug, of course, but in a crowded camp, disease could spread like wildfire. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera, these were the invisible enemies that could decimate an army far more effectively than any opposing force. Contaminated water sources were a huge problem. You might be drinking water that's downstream from where others are washing or relieving themselves. It's a recipe for disaster. Your robust immune system, honed by years of, exposure, is your best defense, but it's not foolproof. And then there are the pests. Lice, fleas, and other delightful little companions were a common part of life. Your armor, with its many layers and crevices, could become a haven for them. Your bedding, likely a simple straw mat, wouldn't offer much protection either. You'd spend a fair amount of time itching, which doesn't really contribute to that stoic samurai image, does it? Imagine trying to maintain a look of fierce concentration while a louse is having a party on your scalp. Medical care, as we touched upon with battlefield injuries, was based on a mix of traditional Chinese medicine, local folk remedies, and a good deal of guesswork. Doctors, if you could even call them that by modern standards, relied on herbal medicines, acupuncture, moxibustion, burning dried mugwort on specific points of the body, ouch, and dietary advice. While some of these remedies might have offered symptomatic relief, their ability to cure serious illnesses or infections was limited. A common cold could turn into pneumonia. A small cut could lead to a raging infection, and there wasn't much that could be done beyond hoping for the best, and maybe some prayers to the relevant kami or Buddha. One quirky and rather stomach-turning tidbit regarding ancient Japanese medicine involves the use of ingredients that would make most modern people recoil. For instance, certain animal parts, insects, or even human-derived substances were sometimes used in medicinal preparations. While the efficacy of such treatments is highly debatable from a modern scientific perspective, it highlights the very different understanding of health and healing that prevailed. The line between medicine, magic, and superstition was often quite blurry. Dental hygiene was also interesting. Toothpicks, koyoji, were used, and some people used powdered salt or even fine sand to clean their teeth. Toothbrushes, as we know them, didn't exist. As a result, dental problems like cavities, gum disease, and tooth loss were likely very common. Imagine trying to deliver an inspiring pre-battle speech with a raging toothache. Not ideal. The general understanding of disease transmission was, to put it mildly, lacking. Illness was often attributed to imbalances in the body's humors, a concept borrowed from Chinese medicine, evil spirits, or unfavorable astrological conditions. So, if there was an outbreak of disease in the camp, the response might involve prayers, rituals, or perhaps burning incense to purify the air, rather than, say, quarantining the sick or boiling the drinking water. Historians still debate the effectiveness of traditional Japanese medicine. While it undoubtedly provided comfort and perhaps some effective treatments for certain ailments, its limitations in the face of serious infectious diseases or traumatic injuries were significant. The emphasis was often on restoring balance to the body, which could be a slow process, not always suited to the acute needs of a warrior. So, while you're striving for that image of the perfectly composed, impeccably turned-out warrior, remember that beneath the armor and the stoic facade, you're likely dealing with a host of less than pleasant realities. You might be itchy, smelly, suffering from a stomach bug thanks to questionable camp water, or nursing a festering wound with nothing but a poultice of questionable herbs to treat it. It's a constant, unglamorous battle against the microscopic foes and the limitations of pre-modern medicine and hygiene. Suddenly, that bland rice diet doesn't seem like the worst of your problems, does it? You're tough, you're a samurai, but you're also a human being susceptible to all the discomforts and dangers of an era where a simple infection could be a death sentence. You've navigated the rigors of training, the terror of the battlefield, the monotony of the diet, and the general discomforts of pre-modern hygiene. You're a survivor, a hardened warrior. But in the world of the samurai, even the way you die is subject to strict codes and expectations. And there's one particular way of dying that is uniquely and chillingly associated with the samurai. Seppuku, sometimes more vulgarly known in the West as harakiri. This isn't just suicide. It's a deeply ritualized, incredibly painful, and, in the samurai mindset, often an honorable way to die. And the prospect of it? Well, that's another reason why being a samurai really sucked. Seppuku was a means to various ends, none of them pleasant. It could be a way to avoid capture by the enemy, thus preventing disgrace and potential torture. It could be a form of capital punishment, a sentence handed down by your lord for a serious offense. It could be a way to protest a lord's decision, a dramatic and final act of dissent known as kanshi. Or perhaps most commonly in the samurai ethos, it could be a way to atone for a failure, a disgrace, or a breach of bushido, thereby restoring lost honor, if not to oneself in life, then to one's name and family in death. Imagine living with the constant awareness that certain mistakes, certain failures, or certain circumstances could lead you to this incredibly grim and public ritual. The pressure must have been immense. The act itself was highly formalized, especially when performed as a sentence or a deeply considered personal act. It wasn't a quick, impulsive decision. There was a prescribed setting, often a quiet garden or designated room within a temple. You, the one performing seppuku, would typically be dressed in white robes, the color of purity and death. You'd be allowed a final meal, perhaps some sake. Witnesses would be present, officials, sometimes family members or trusted friends. And crucially, you would usually have a kaishakunin, a second, typically a skilled swordsman chosen for his ability to deliver a clean, swift, decapitating blow. His role was, well, we'll get to that. You would kneel in the formal seiza position. Before you, on a small low stand, would be the instrument of your demise. Traditionally, a tanto, a short sword or dagger, or a wakizashi, the shorter of the two swords, a samurai typically carried. Sometimes, if a real blade wasn't available or permitted, for instance, if you were a condemned prisoner, a wooden sword or even a fan might be used symbolically, with the kaishakunin striking at the appointed moment. You would then compose yourself, perhaps writing a jisei, a death poem, to express your final thoughts. A unique Japanese tradition, blending artistic expression with the ultimate act of finality. Imagine trying to find the right words for your last verse, contemplating the moment that would end your life. Then came the act itself. The method involved a ritual incision across the abdomen, from left to right, followed by a second, upward cut, if one possessed the necessary fortitude. This choice was deeply symbolic, as the abdomen, or hara, was considered the seat of the spirit, will, and emotions in Japanese culture. By performing this act, one aimed to reveal their true untarnished spirit, demonstrating sincerity and courage even in death. It was a profoundly symbolic and undoubtedly harrowing ritual. Now about that kaishakunin. His role was, in a grim way, an act of mercy, though it might not seem like it. After you made the initial cut, and before you lost consciousness or writhed in prolonged agony, the kaishakunin would step forward and, with a single precise sword stroke, sever your head, or nearly sever it, leaving a small flap of skin at the front of the neck, so the head would fall forward into your lap rather than rolling away grotesquely. A final, small point of etiquette in this gruesome affair. The skill of the kaishakunin was paramount. A botched cut would only prolong the suffering and bring shame upon everyone involved. Being chosen as a kaishakunin was a solemn honor, but also a terrible responsibility. Historians note that the practice of seppuku evolved over time. In earlier periods, it might have been a more straightforward, brutal affair on the battlefield to avoid capture. Later, particularly during the Edo period, when warfare was less frequent, it became more ritualized and sometimes even romanticized as the ultimate expression of samurai loyalty and honor. There's a famous mainstream historical fact, the tale of the 47 Ronin, who, after avenging their master's death, were all ordered to commit seppuku. Their story became a legendary example of loyalty and honorable death, celebrated in plays and art for centuries. However, it's crucial to remember the sheer horror and pain involved. One particularly quirky, or rather disturbing aspect, was the existence of junshi, or following the Lord in death. This was the practice of samurai committing seppuku upon the death of their master, as an ultimate display of loyalty. While seen as honorable by some, it was eventually outlawed by the Tokugawa shogunate in the 17th century because it was leading to a significant loss of valuable retainers. Imagine the pressure. Your lord dies, and you're suddenly faced with the expectation, spoken or unspoken, that you should follow him into the afterlife via an agonizing ritual. The scholarly debate often centers on the true voluntariness of seppuku. While presented as an act of will, how much of it was driven by intense social pressure, the fear of shame, or direct orders? Was it truly a free choice, or an inescapable obligation dictated by a warrior code that valued honor far above individual life? The very existence of seppuku as an accepted, even lauded practice underscores the brutal realities of the samurai world. It meant that at any given moment, your life could be forfeit. not just to an enemy's blade, but to your own, guided by the unyielding demands of honor and duty. It meant that failure was not an option, or rather that failure had a very specific, very painful, and very public remedy. It's a terrifying thought to live under the shadow of such an honorable, awful end. It adds another profound layer of suckiness to the samurai experience, where even your final moments could be a meticulously choreographed performance of agony and resolve. Sweet dreams, right? Probably not if you're contemplating the intricacies of abdominal self-laceration. So you've got the code, the training, the questionable food, the dodgy hygiene, and the ever-present possibility of a rather gruesome self-inflicted end. What else could possibly make your samurai life a trial? Oh, let me introduce you to your boss, your daimyo, your feudal lord. In the strictly hierarchical world of feudal Japan, his word is not just law. It's pretty much the operating system of your entire existence. Your lord, your life, it's a package deal, and you don't get to negotiate the terms. His whim, his strategic needs, his personal preferences can dictate almost every significant aspect of your life, from where you live, to whom you marry, and even how you earn your rice-based living. First and foremost, your primary duty, the one that trumps almost everything else, is loyalty and service to your daimyo. We touched on chugi, loyalty, when discussing Bushido, but let's delve into the practical implications. Your daimyo is the one who holds the fief, the territory that provides your income, your koku of rice, remember? He's the one who commands you in battle, who sets policy, and who ultimately determines your fate. Disobeying him, or even appearing to question his judgment too openly, can have dire consequences: loss of position, confiscation of your stipend, exile, or even an order to commit that rather unpleasant ritual we just discussed, seppuku. Think about your career path, if you can even call it that. You don't really apply for promotions or seek out new job opportunities. Your assignments, your postings, your rank are all at the discretion of your lord. He might decide you're best suited to guard a remote border fortress, miles away from your family and any semblance of comfort, for years on end. Or he might assign you to an administrative role in his castle town, a position that might be safer, but could be mind-numbingly dull for a warrior itching for action. You go where you're told. You do what you're told, and you do it without complaint, because that is the essence of your service. What about your personal life? Surely that's your own affair? Not so much. Marriage for a samurai, especially one of any significant standing, was rarely a matter of romantic love. It was a strategic tool, an alliance between families, a way to secure loyalty, or to consolidate power and influence. Your daimyo, or at least his chief retainers, would often have a significant say in who you married. Your prospective spouse would be chosen based on her family's status, connections, and the potential benefits the union could bring to your lord or your clan. You might meet your bride for the first time on your wedding day. Love might grow, or it might not. Duty, again, was the primary concern. The happiness of the individuals involved? A secondary consideration, if it was considered at all. Even your children's lives could be heavily influenced by the Lord's wishes. Your sons would be expected to follow you into service, their paths also subject to the daimyo's needs and assessments. Your daughters would become part of the same system of strategic marriages. There's a poignant lack of personal autonomy in this system. Your life is interwoven with, and subordinate to, the needs and dictates of the feudal structure, personified by your daimyo. A mainstream historical fact, that illustrates this power dynamic is the Sankin Kotai system, established by the Tokugawa shogunate. This required daimyo to spend alternate years in residence in Edo, modern-day Tokyo, the shogun's capital, and to leave their wives and heirs in Edo as virtual hostages when they returned to their own domains. While this was a measure to ensure the loyalty of the daimyo to the shogun, imagine the ripple effect on the samurai retainers. They would have to accompany their lord on these long, expensive journeys, uprooting their lives, or being separated from their own families for extended periods. It was a constant drain on resources and a source of significant disruption. One quirky, lesser-known aspect of a lord's influence could extend to seemingly trivial matters. A daimyo might have particular preferences for certain styles of martial arts, certain types of armor, or even certain modes of dress or behavior among his retainers. To curry favor or simply to stay in good graces, you'd be wise to adopt these preferences. Imagine your lord suddenly develops a passion for a particularly obscure form of spear fighting, or decides that all his samurai must wear a specific, slightly ridiculous helmet crest. You'd be practicing that spear technique or sporting that crest, no questions asked. It's like office politics, but with much higher stakes and potentially pointier accessories. The relationship between a samurai and his lord was ideally one of mutual respect and trust. The lord provided for his retainers, led them, and offered them a path to honor and advancement. The retainers, in turn, offered their unwavering loyalty and their lives. However, not all daimyo were wise, just, or competent. You could find yourself bound to a foolish, cruel, or indecisive lord. And this is where Bushido's tenets could create intense internal conflict. What do you do if your lord orders you to do something you believe to be unjust or dishonorable? The code demands loyalty, but it also demands righteousness, GI. Historians still ponder how samurai navigated these complex ethical dilemmas. Some tales speak of samurai committing kanchi, remonstrative seppuku, to shock a wayward lord back to the correct path. Others might have chosen a quieter form of disapproval, or perhaps sought to mitigate the negative consequences of their lord's actions through subtle means. But open defiance was rarely an option that ended well for the samurai. Ultimately, your entire well-being, your family's security, your honor, and your very life were inextricably tied to the fortunes and the favor of your daimyo. If he prospered, you might prosper. If he fell from power or made a disastrous decision, you would fall with him. This absolute dependence, this lack of control over so many fundamental aspects of your own life, is a stark contrast to modern ideals of individual freedom and self-determination. You are a cog, albeit a highly skilled and honored one, in a vast feudal machine, and the primary operator of that machine is your lord. His hand is on the lever that controls your destiny. And that, my friends, is a pretty significant way in which it sucked to be you, the samurai. So you're living this life of rigorous discipline, unquestioning loyalty to your potentially whimsical lord. And let's not forget the constant threat of a rather dramatic, self-inflicted exit strategy. You'd think that for all this hardship and unwavering service, you'd at least be well compensated, right? Rolling in rice bales, perhaps, with a nice little sack budget on the side? Well, for some high-ranking samurai, that might have been close to the truth. But for many, many others, the financial reality of being a samurai was surprisingly precarious. Forget the image of every samurai being a wealthy aristocrat. Many faced genuine economic hardship, a constant worry about making ends meet, or rather, making the rice stipend stretch far enough, as we mentioned before. A samurai's income was typically paid in koku of rice, granted by their daimyo from the domain's agricultural output. This stipend was meant to support you, your family, and any retainers or servants you might be expected to maintain. The amount you received varied enormously based on your rank, your specific duties, and the overall wealth of your domain. A trusted advisor to the daimyo, or a renowned commander, might receive thousands of koku, making them very wealthy indeed. But a lower-ranking samurai, perhaps a foot soldier or a minor functionary, might receive a stipend that was barely enough to sustain a modest household. The problem was, this rice-based economy had its limitations, especially as Japan moved towards a more commercialized, money-based economy, particularly during the relatively peaceful Edo period, 1603-1868. While rice was your official payment, you still needed actual cash for many things. To buy goods for merchants, who dealt in coins, to pay for services, to purchase items that weren't produced on your lord's lands, or even to convert your rice into money. A process that involved rice brokers and fluctuating market prices. If the price of rice fell, the actual monetary value of your stipend decreased, even if the number of koku you received remained the same. Imagine getting paid in, say, bushels of wheat, and then having to barter that wheat for everything else you need, hoping the exchange rate is favorable. It's not exactly convenient. Furthermore, being a samurai came with certain expected expenses. You had to maintain your swords and armor, which could be costly. You were expected to dress appropriately for your station, which meant investing in kimonos and other attire. If you were required to perform duties in the castle town, or accompany your lord on his Sankenkotai journeys to Edo, you had to cover your travel and living expenses, which could be substantial. Many samurai, especially those with smaller stipends, found themselves falling into debt to wealthy merchants and moneylenders. This was a source of considerable stress and, ironically, shame for a class that prided itself on honor and self-sufficiency. There are numerous accounts from the Edo period of samurai families living in genteel poverty, struggling to maintain the outward appearance of their status while secretly scrimping and saving, or even pawning their possessions. A mainstream historical fact is that during the long peace of the Tokugawa shogunate, many samurai found their martial skills less in demand. While they were still the ruling class, their primary role shifted from active warfare to administration, bureaucracy, and maintaining order. This often meant that stipends, which had been set based on wartime needs and contributions, either stagnated or were even reduced, while the cost of living, particularly in urban centers like Edo, continued to rise. This created a growing class of impoverished samurai. One quirky and rather telling tidbit about samurai financial woes is the rise of side hustles. To supplement their meager stipends, some lower-ranking samurai were forced to take up crafts or trades that were traditionally considered beneath their status. You might find a samurai secretly making umbrellas, crafting geita, wooden sandals, or even raising crickets to sell as pets. Singing crickets were a popular, if niche, market. Some even became teachers or took on other scholarly pursuits for pay. While Bushido emphasized a certain disdain for commerce and material wealth, at least overtly, the practical realities of feeding one's family often necessitated such compromises. Imagine your fearsome warrior secretly toiling away at night, making paper lanterns just to afford a bit more rice for the kids. It's a far cry from the image of the aloof, battle-ready hero. This financial insecurity could also create a breeding ground for frustration and resentment. You've dedicated your life to the warrior code. You uphold the honor of your name and your lord, yet you can barely afford to repair the holes in your roof. Meanwhile, merchants who were officially at the bottom of the Confucian social hierarchy, samurai, farmers, artisans, merchants in that order, were often accumulating considerable wealth. This inversion of economic power versus social status was a source of tension in Tokugawa society. Scholars still debate the extent to which this economic distress contributed to the eventual decline of the samurai class and the Meiji Restoration. Did widespread samurai poverty create a discontented class ready for change? Or were other political and social factors more significant? It's likely a combination of factors, but financial hardships certainly didn't help maintain the status quo. So, while you might hold your head high, your swords polished, your demeanor stoic, there's a good chance your stomach is rumbling. Not just from a bland diet, but from the gnawing worry of how you're going to pay for your next set of arrows, or that new tatami mat your wife has been hinting about. The honor of being a samurai didn't automatically come with a comfortable bank account. For many, it was a life of constant financial juggling, a quiet struggle to maintain dignity in the face of diminishing resources. This hidden burden, this unglamorous anxiety about coins and koku, adds another layer to why being a samurai could, quite frankly, be a real pain in the rice basket. So you're a samurai, navigating the tightrope of honor and duty, possibly while secretly crafting artisanal paper fans at night to make ends meet. Your life is supposed to be about glorious battle and unwavering loyalty in the face of imminent pointy danger. But what happens when the battles stop? This was a very real situation for many samurai, particularly during the long, relatively stable peace of the Edo period, which lasted for over 250 years under the Tokugawa shogunate. That's a mainstream historical fact for you. 2.5 centuries where the primary job description of a warrior class became somewhat redundant. And let me tell you, for a man trained from birth to kill, to lead, and to die gloriously, prolonged peace could be its own kind of battlefield. The battlefield of boredom, existential angst, and an endless parade of often mind-numbing busy work. Imagine it. Your magnificent armor gathers dust. Your prized katana, the soul of the samurai, is used more for ceremonial occasions than for actual combat. The stirring tales of battlefield heroism that filled your youth now seem like distant legends, irrelevant to your daily life. Your primary purpose, the very reason for your class's existence, has been put on indefinite hold. This could lead to a profound existential crisis. Who am I, if not a warrior in action? What is my value in a world that no longer seems to need my martial skills? These aren't questions you'd voice openly, of course. That wouldn't be very samurai-like. But they might churn within you, a quiet unease in the long, peaceful days, to keep the samurai class occupied, and, frankly, to justify their continued stipends, however meager they might have become. Many were absorbed into the burgeoning bureaucracy of the shogunate and the various daimyo domains. So, you, the finely honed instrument of war, might find yourself pushing papers, overseeing rice granaries, adjudicating minor disputes between peasants, or meticulously recording tax collections. Instead of strategizing troop movements, you're strategizing how to navigate the complex etiquette of a provincial government office. Instead of facing down enemy spearmen, you're facing down stacks of official documents that need to be stamped, copied, and filed in triplicate. it's not exactly the stuff of heroic ballads. The highlight of your week might be a particularly well-drafted memo on agricultural yields. Thrilling. This shift often meant a life governed by intricate rules, endless meetings, and the subtle, often frustrating, politics of peacetime administration. The skills required, patience, attention to detail, diplomacy, of a particularly stifling bureaucratic kind, were not necessarily the ones you'd spent your life cultivating in the dojo. You might find yourself longing for the clear-cut dangers of the battlefield, where at least the enemy was obvious and the objectives were usually straightforward. Here, the enemy might be an inefficient colleague, a contradictory directive from a superior, or the sheer crushing weight of administrative inertia. Of course, martial training didn't cease entirely. Dojos still operated, and samurai were still expected to maintain their skills. But the nature of this training sometimes shifted. With no real wars to test them, martial arts could become more formalized, more ritualistic, even more performative. Some schools might focus on incredibly complex katas that looked impressive, but perhaps had less practical application in a real fight. It became, for some, a way to maintain a connection to their warrior identity, a discipline for its own sake, rather than a preparation for imminent combat. One quirky tidbit from this era is the rise in popularity of dojoyaburi, or dojo challenges, where a samurai might travel to another school's dojo and challenge its master or senior students. While ostensibly about testing skills, these could also be about building reputation or relieving the monotony, a kind of sporting contest for a warrior class with too much time on its hands. It's like an extreme version of office softball, but with a much higher chance of broken bones. The boredom could also lead to less constructive pursuits. With too much idle time and not enough purpose, some samurai might fall into gambling, excessive drinking, or frequenting the pleasure quarters. These were temporary escapes, of course, and often led to further financial woes and potential disgrace if taken to extremes. The strictures of Bushido were still in place, but the lack of a clear martial outlet for their energy and ambition could make adherence more challenging for some. Scholars often debate the overall impact of this long peace on the samurai spirit. Did it genuinely soften them, as some contemporary critics and later historians have suggested, turning a fierce warrior class into mere functionaries and dandies? Or did the samurai successfully adapt their core values of discipline, loyalty, and honor to these new non-martial roles, finding new ways to express their warrior ethos through administrative service, scholarship, or the perfection of peacetime arts? The answer is likely complex and varied. Some undoubtedly languished, becoming anachronisms in a changing world. Others found new purpose, contributing significantly to the stability and governance of Tokugawa Japan. But for many, it must have felt like being a finely tuned racing car stuck in an endless traffic jam. All that power, all that training, all that potential, with nowhere to truly unleash it. The battlefield of boredom is a subtle but insidious one, and for a samurai whose identity was forged in the crucible of war, it could be a uniquely challenging and deeply frustrating place to exist. So you're navigating the existential ennui of peacetime bureaucracy. Your katana perhaps more of a status symbol than a practical tool these days. You might think that at least in your private life, within the walls of your own home, you'd find some respite, some personal freedom. But as with so many other aspects of your samurai existence, family life, particularly marriage, and the expectations surrounding heirs, was often less about romantic delight and more about duty, strategy, and the continuation of your lineage. Your heart's desires? They often took a distant back seat to the pragmatic needs of your family and your lord. We touched on it earlier, but it bears repeating. Marriage for a samurai was rarely a love match. It was typically an arranged affair, a contract between families designed to forge alliances, secure political or economic advantages, or ensure social stability. Your parents, or perhaps your lord if you were of significant rank, would select your bride. The key considerations were her family status, their connections, their wealth, in the form of her dowry, which could be crucial for a financially strapped samurai family. Remember those koku worries? And her perceived ability to bear healthy children, especially sons. Your personal feelings about your prospective partner. Largely irrelevant. You were expected to marry for the good of the house, not for the flutterings of your heart. Imagine meeting your wife for the first time during the elaborate betrothal ceremonies, or even on the wedding day itself. You're both entering into a lifelong commitment, a partnership based on duty and societal expectation. Love might develop over time, a quiet affection born of shared responsibilities and the passage of years. Or it might not. You might find yourselves coexisting, fulfilling your respective roles, maintaining a polite and respectful facade, but without any deep emotional connection. Divorce was possible, but it was generally difficult, often initiated by the husband or his family, and could bring shame upon the wife and her natal family. So, you often made the best of it. The pressure to produce an heir, specifically a son, was immense. Your primary role as head of the household, beyond serving your lord, was to ensure the continuation of your family line, your i.e., a son would inherit your name, your status, your possibly meager stipend, and your duty to serve the Lord. He would carry on the family traditions and perform the necessary ancestral rites. Not having a son could be a source of great anxiety and even social stigma. If your wife didn't produce a male heir after a certain number of years, it wasn't uncommon for a samurai to take a concubine, if he could afford one, or to adopt a son, often a nephew or a younger son from a related family, to secure the succession. This wasn't necessarily a reflection of a lack of affection for any daughters you might have, but a harsh reality of a patriarchal system focused on lineage. What about the role of your wife, the samurai woman? Her life was also one of duty and constraint. While women of the samurai class were often educated, literate, and expected to be skilled in household management, which could be a complex undertaking, especially in larger households with retainers and servants, their sphere of influence was largely confined to the home. Her primary duties were to manage the household efficiently, to be loyal and obedient to her husband and his family, and, crucially, to bear and raise children, especially that all-important male heir. A mainstream historical fact is that many samurai women were also trained in martial arts, particularly the naginata, a pole weapon with a curved blade. This wasn't so they could join their husbands on the battlefield, but so they could defend the home and family in their absence, a testament to their resilience and the often unstable times. This practice was known as onna bugeisha. However, despite this martial training, their legal and social standing was generally subordinate to men. Her identity was largely subsumed by her husband's family upon marriage. There's a scholarly debate about the true extent of agency samurai women possessed. While the formal structures were undeniably patriarchal, some historians argue that women, through their management of the household, their influence over their children's upbringing, and sometimes through their own networks and intelligence, could wield considerable informal power and influence. Were they simply passive figures? Or did they find ways to navigate and shape their circumstances within the existing constraints? The answer likely varies greatly depending on individual personality, family dynamics, and social standing. One quirky tidbit related to samurai family life involves superstitions and rituals surrounding childbirth and child rearing. For example, there might be specific amulets worn by pregnant women to ensure a safe delivery, or rituals performed to protect a newborn from evil spirits. The choice of a child's name was often a very deliberate process, sometimes involving consultation with priests or fortune tellers to ensure an auspicious name that would bring good luck. Given the high infant and child mortality rates of the era, these practices, born of hope and fear, were understandable. So your home life, while perhaps a refuge from the pressures of your lord or the boredom of your peacetime duties, was still governed by a complex web of expectations and responsibilities. It wasn't a place where you could simply kick off your waraji and be completely yourself. You were a husband with duties, a father with responsibilities for lineage, the head of a household that represented your family's honor. Romantic love, passionate connection, these were bonuses if they occurred, not prerequisites. The structure of your family life, like so many other aspects of your existence, was designed to serve the larger needs of the social order, the clan, and the continuation of the samurai way. It's another layer of your life where personal desires often had to be sublimated to the demands of your role, making those happily ever afters a rather more complicated affair than in storybooks. You're navigating the complexities of your career, or lack thereof in peacetime, and your highly structured family life, all while trying to maintain that stoic samurai composure. But there's another, entirely unpredictable and often devastating force that constantly looms over your existence in feudal Japan: Mother Nature herself. Japan is a land of breathtaking beauty, yes, but it's also a place perched precariously on the ring of fire, subject to a terrifying array of natural disasters: typhoons, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and even just brutally cold winters or scorching summers could make your already challenging life significantly suckier, testing your famed samurai resilience in ways no dojo training could ever fully prepare you for. Imagine living with the constant, underlying hum of anxiety that the very ground beneath your feet could erupt in violence at any moment. Earthquakes, or jishin, were a terrifyingly common occurrence. You might be in your home, perhaps mending your armor or practicing calligraphy, when suddenly the world begins to shake. The wooden beams of your house groan and creak, paper screens rattle, pottery shatters on the floor. A minor tremor might just be a momentary disruption, a reminder of the land's power. But a major quake, that could mean utter devastation. Buildings collapsing, fires breaking out. Remember, houses were largely wood and paper, and the horrifying prospect of being trapped, injured, or losing loved ones. The Great Ansei Edo earthquake of 1855 is a well-documented historical fact, killing thousands and causing widespread destruction. And it was just one of many such catastrophic events throughout Japanese history. The fear of the earthquake fire father, Jishin, Kaji, Oyaji, with Oyaji, or father representing the ultimate, unchallengeable authority, sometimes also interpreted as thunder or typhoon, was a common saying, listing the most dreaded calamities. Then there are the typhoons, or taifu. These ferocious tropical cyclones would sweep in from the ocean, bringing torrential rains, devastating winds, and storm surges that could inundate coastal areas. Your traditional Japanese house, while ingeniously designed for ventilation in hot summers, with its sliding paper screens, shoji, and light wooden construction, offered precious little resistance to the fury of a typhoon. Roofs could be torn off, walls could collapse, and entire villages could be flattened or washed away. If you live near the coast, the threat of a tsunami, a massive sea wave often triggered by an offshore earthquake, was another terrifying possibility. The idea of the ocean itself rising up to swallow your home and community is the stuff of nightmares. And let's not forget volcanoes. Japan is dotted with active volcanoes, and eruptions could spew ash over vast areas, destroying crops, polluting water sources, and creating an eerie, darkened landscape. The ash fall could make breathing difficult and cause long-term agricultural problems, leading to famine. One quirky, though grim tidbit is the existence of various folk beliefs and Shinto rituals aimed at placating the kami, spirits or gods, believed to reside in mountains, volcanoes, and other natural features. Offerings might be made, or festivals held, in an attempt to appease these powerful and often volatile natural forces. Whether these rituals actually worked is, of course, a matter of faith, not science, but they reflect the deep respect and fear that nature inspired. Even without these dramatic, large-scale disasters, the ordinary seasons could bring their own hardships. Summers in many parts of Japan can be incredibly hot and humid. Remember that armor we talked about? Imagine wearing that in sweltering heat, or even just existing in a poorly ventilated house that traps the humid air. Heat stroke and exhaustion would be constant risks. Winters, on the other hand, especially in northern Japan or mountainous regions, could be brutally cold. Your traditional home, with its thin walls and paper screens, offered little insulation. The main source of heat would likely be a charcoal brazier, a hibachi, which provided only localized warmth and carried the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning, if not properly ventilated. You'd be bundled in layers of clothing, huddling around the meager heat source, the cold seeping into your bones. Frostbite was a real danger. Just surviving the elements was a daily struggle. These natural challenges had a profound impact on every aspect of life, including your duties as a samurai. A major earthquake or flood could disrupt supply lines, destroy fortifications, and create widespread social unrest, requiring samurai to act as emergency responders, peacekeepers, and engineers, all while potentially dealing with their own personal losses. Famines, often triggered by unseasonable weather, typhoons, or volcanic eruptions, could lead to desperation and peasant uprisings, which you, as a samurai, would be expected to quell. Scholars often debate how significantly this constant exposure to the raw, untamed power of nature shaped the Japanese national character, and, by extension, the samurai ethos. Did it contribute to a sense of fatalism and acceptance of the transience of life, a concept known as mujo? Or did it foster a profound resilience, an ability to endure hardship, rebuild, and carry on, which became a hallmark of the samurai spirit? It's likely a bit of both. The awareness that everything could be swept away in an instant might have reinforced the importance of honor, duty, and living each moment with purpose, as well as a certain stoic acceptance of fate. So, when you picture yourself as a samurai, Don't just see the swords and the serene gardens. See yourself huddling against the winter cold in a drafty room, or anxiously watching the sky as a typhoon approaches, or feeling the earth tremble beneath you. Your life wasn't just a struggle against human enemies or societal pressures. It was also a constant negotiation with a powerful and often unforgiving natural world. Another layer of suck, courtesy of Mother Nature's less agreeable moods. You've weathered the storms, both literal and metaphorical. You faced down enemies on the battlefield, or the even more terrifying battlefield of bureaucratic boredom, navigated the complexities of family duty, and shivered through uninsulated winters. Through it all, there's this pervasive ideal of the samurai as not just a warrior, but also a man of culture, a poet, an aesthete. This brings us to one of the most fascinating, and perhaps internally conflicting, aspects of your samurai life: the need to reconcile the brutal realities of your profession with the refined, poetic ideals of beauty, transience, and honor. It's the paradox of the cherry blossom and the blood-stained sword, existing side by side in your world, and often within your own heart. Japanese culture, and by extension samurai culture, placed a high value on aesthetics, on finding beauty and simplicity in nature, and even in imperfection. You would have been exposed to and likely expected to cultivate an appreciation for various artistic pursuits. Poetry, particularly the concise and evocative forms of waka and later haiku, was a highly respected art. Many famous samurai were also accomplished poets, using verse to express their emotions, their observations on nature, or their thoughts on life and death. Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary swordsman, was also a renowned ink painter and calligrapher, a clear historical fact illustrating this blend of martial prowess and artistic sensitivity. Then there's the tea ceremony, chanoyu. This wasn't just about drinking tea. It was a meditative ritual emphasizing harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. Wa Kei Sei Jaku. In a meticulously designed tea house, with carefully chosen utensils and a precise sequence of movements, you would seek a moment of calm and focus, a spiritual refreshment that could seem worlds away from the chaos of battle or the drudgery of official duties. Calligraphy, shodo, was another essential skill, requiring immense control, balance, and an understanding of form and space. The act of grinding the ink, focusing your mind, and executing each stroke with precision was itself a form of active meditation. You might also appreciate ikebana, the art of flower arranging, where asymmetry, space, and the natural form of the materials are key. Or perhaps you'd find solace in the contemplation of a carefully raked Zen garden, its stones and sand representing vast landscapes and profound philosophical concepts. Even attending a no-theater performance, with its slow, stylized movements, symbolic masks, and themes often drawn from history and legend, was a way to engage with deeper cultural and spiritual ideas. A core aesthetic concept that permeated much of this was mono no aware, a bittersweet awareness of the transience of all things. The classic example is the cherry blossom. Its beauty is stunning, breathtaking, but also incredibly fleeting. The blossoms appear in a glorious burst of color, then fall within a week or two, scattered by the wind. This poignant beauty, beautiful because it is impermanent, resonated deeply with the samurai ethos. Your own life as a warrior was often precarious, potentially cut short at any moment. the cherry blossom became a powerful symbol of the ideal samurai life: to live brilliantly, honorably, and to face death with grace and acceptance when the time came. But here's the rub. How do you reconcile this profound appreciation for beauty, tranquility, and the gentle melancholy of Mono no Aware with the brutal, visceral reality of your profession? Your job, fundamentally, involves violence. It involves causing harm, taking lives, witnessing horrific injuries, and wading through the ugliness of war. One moment you might be composing a delicate poem about the dew on a lotus leaf, and the next you could be cleaving an enemy in two. The warm spray of blood a shocking contrast to the serenity you cultivated in the tea room. This internal dissonance must have been a significant psychological burden for many samurai. How do you maintain your humanity, your capacity for appreciating beauty and tenderness, when your daily existence, or at least your ultimate purpose, is so steeped in bloodshed and conflict? Perhaps these artistic and spiritual pursuits were not just pleasant pastimes, but essential coping mechanisms, ways to find balance, to reaffirm one's humanity, and to process the traumas of war. They might have provided a necessary counterpoint to the harshness of the warrior's path, a way to touch something pure and enduring in a world of violence and impermanence. One quirky, yet deeply illustrative tidbit is the tradition of samurai writing jisei, or death poems, just before a battle they didn't expect to survive, or before committing seppuku. We've mentioned this before, but think about it. In your final moments, facing imminent, often violent death, you pause to compose a few lines of poetry. It's an extraordinary act, a testament to the deep integration of art and life, and art and death, in the samurai mindset. These poems weren't necessarily about bravado. Often, they were reflections on nature, expressions of regret, or simple statements of acceptance. It's a uniquely samurai way of facing the abyss with a final, personal flourish of refined sensibility. Scholars still debate the extent to which this warrior poet ideal was a widespread reality, or more of an elite affectation, particularly during the peaceful Edo period when samurai had more leisure for such pursuits. Was the average, perhaps less educated samurai truly a connoisseur of fine art and a composer of delicate verse? Or was this image cultivated by the upper echelons of the samurai class and later romanticized? It's likely that the level of artistic engagement varied greatly. However, the cultural expectation was there. The ideal was present. You were supposed to be more than just a brute. You were supposed to embody a complex blend of martial strength and spiritual refinement. This constant toggling between the world of the sword and the world of the chrysanthemum, between the battlefield and the tea house, must have been exhausting. It required a kind of mental compartmentalization, or perhaps a unique philosophical framework that allowed these seemingly contradictory aspects to coexist. It's another layer of complexity, another subtle way in which being a samurai wasn't just about fighting, but about navigating a profound internal landscape of conflicting values and experiences, all while trying to maintain your honor and your sanity. The beauty was undeniable, but so was the blood, and finding a way to live with both was perhaps one of your greatest and most unsung challenges. You've walked this incredibly demanding path, a life of iron discipline, unwavering loyalty, financial anxieties, existential boredom, challenging family duties, and the constant shadow of both natural disasters and a highly ritualized, painful death. You've tried to balance the ugliness of war with an appreciation for fleeting beauty. A warrior and a poet wrapped in one often uncomfortable package. And after all this, after centuries of the samurai class shaping the history and culture of Japan, you find yourself standing at a precipice, witnessing the slow, inexorable sunset of your entire way of life. The world is changing, and the era of the samurai, with all its glories and its profound suckiness, is drawing to a close. The mid-19th century brought immense pressure to Japan. The arrival of Western powers, particularly Commodore Perry's Black Ships from the United States in 1853, shattered Japan's centuries-long isolation. The Tokugawa shogunate, which had maintained peace and stability for so long, found itself unable to effectively counter this foreign threat. This led to a period of intense internal turmoil, political maneuvering, and ultimately, the Meiji Restoration in 1868. This wasn't just a change in government. It was a fundamental transformation of Japanese society, a rapid modernization and westernization that aimed to strengthen Japan and enable it to compete on the global stage. And for the samurai class, these changes were cataclysmic. One of the earliest and most profound blows was the dismantling of the feudal system. The daimyo were stripped of their domains, and their lands were returned to the emperor. This, in turn, meant the abolition of the samurai class as a distinct, privileged social order. Your hereditary stipends, those koku of rice that had been your family's lifeblood for generations, however inadequate they sometimes felt, were gradually phased out, often converted into government bonds of diminishing value. Suddenly, your status, your income, your very identity as a samurai were being systematically erased by imperial decree. Imagine the shock, the confusion, the anger. Everything you had been raised to believe in, everything your ancestors had fought and died for, was being swept away. Your martial skills, honed over a lifetime, were becoming increasingly irrelevant in an era of modern conscript armies with firearms. The sword, the soul of the samurai, was being replaced by the rifle. The traditional samurai topknot, a symbol of your status, was discouraged and eventually abandoned by most as men adopted Western hairstyles. Even the right to wear swords in public, a key visual marker of samurai identity, was eventually prohibited by the Hiterai Edict in 1876. This was a deeply symbolic act, akin to telling a knight he could no longer wear his armor or carry his lance. Many samurai struggled to adapt to this new reality. Some, particularly those from influential domains or with skills relevant to the new government, like administration or Western learning, managed to transition into roles in the Meiji bureaucracy, the military, police forces, or education. But for countless others, especially lower-ranking samurai or those whose skills were purely martial, the future was bleak. They had no land to farm, having been a ruling class, not an agricultural one. No training in commerce or industry. They were, in many ways, anachronisms in a rapidly modernizing nation. One quirky and often sad tidbit from this period is accounts of samurai attempting to enter business or trade, professions they had traditionally looked down upon, often with disastrous results due to their lack of experience and, sometimes, an inability to shed their old sense of status and engage in the perceived grubbiness of commerce. There were stories of samurai trying to run shops with a stern, martial demeanor that scared away customers, or making terrible investment decisions. The loss of status, income, and purpose led to widespread discontent among many former samurai. This culminated in a series of uprisings, the most significant of which was the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by Saigo Takamori. This is a major historical fact. Saigo, often called the last true samurai, was a complex figure who had initially supported the Meiji Restoration, but became disillusioned with its policies towards the samurai class. His rebellion, though ultimately unsuccessful and brutally suppressed by the new Imperial Japanese Army, ironically, an army built on Western models and largely composed of conscripts, not samurai, became a poignant symbol of the samurai's final, tragic stand against the tide of modernity. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether the end of the samurai class was an unavoidable consequence of Japan's modernization, or if their role could have evolved differently, perhaps allowing them to retain more of their traditional identity within the new framework. Could there have been a smoother transition, one that caused less hardship and dislocation for this once dominant class? Or was the complete dismantling of the old feudal order, including the samurai, a necessary step for Japan to transform itself into a modern nation-state capable of resisting Western imperialism? As you, an aging samurai in this period of tumultuous change, look around, you see a world that no longer values your code, your skills, or your sacrifices in the same way. The cherry blossoms still bloom and fall with their poignant beauty, but now they seem to symbolize not just the transience of a single life, but the passing of an entire age. The sun is indeed setting on your world. The stories of your ancestors, the rigorous training, the battlefield horrors, the quiet dignity of the tea ceremony, the constant struggle for honor. It's all fading into history, soon to become the stuff of legends, romanticized and perhaps misunderstood by future generations who will never truly know what it meant, what it sucked to be a samurai. You are a relic, a ghost from a bygone era, watching as the new dawn breaks over a Japan that has, in many ways, left you behind. The weight of this realization settles upon you, heavier than any armor you ever wore. The path you walked, so clearly defined by tradition and duty, has dissolved. What remains is uncertainty, a sense of loss, and perhaps a quiet pride in having lived by a code, however demanding, however flawed. The world moves on, as it always does, and you are left to find your place in its new, unfamiliar landscape, or to simply fade away with the setting sun. The air around you seems to grow still, the echoes of battle and the rustle of silk kimonos fading into a quiet hum. The sharp edges of memory begin to soften. The weight of your armor, the sting of the cold, the ache of your muscles after endless drills. All these sensations begin to recede, replaced by a gentle sense of peace. You've walked a long and arduous path through fields of honor and valleys of hardship. The demands were great, the sacrifices many. But now the journey is reaching its end, and a different kind of stillness envelops you. The world outside, with its bustling changes and new rhythms, continues on its course. But for you in this moment, there is only the gentle cadence of your own breath, a soft and steady rhythm. Let the images of feudal Japan, the gleaming swords, the stoic faces, the cherry blossoms falling like snow, drift and blur. There is no more code to uphold, no lord to serve, no battle to prepare for. There is only this quiet, this easing, this letting go. Allow yourself to sink deeper into comfort, feeling the support beneath you, the warmth around you. The story is told, the sun has set, and now only rest remains.